Welcome to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
Snow, a Steampunk Fairy Tale by Joy Finlay. Part 4. Chapter 12. Oh goodness! Oh goodness! She stood hyperventilating, struggling to breathe as voices echoed around her. Someone sat her back down and forced her head between her knees. She started to breathe a little easier, but when she tried to sit up, Pat held her head down. "Keep breathing," he told her. "Oh goodness, I can't let her do this." She spoke into her knees. "I won't let her do this. He's my friend, my best friend." She kept breathing, speaking under her seat until she was the only one talking. She sat up suddenly to clarify. "Next to all of you, of course." "Oh goodness." She started hyperventilating all over again. In front of 7 sets of eyes. Pat pushed her head down below her knees again. "We can't let her do this," she said. "We can't let her do this," Pat repeated. She sat up. "I just said that," and he pushed her head down again. "Honey, I know, but no one else can hear you speak from down there," he replied. "There's a first," one of them yelled out. She giggled and then tried to calm down her breathing, even as her racing heart betrayed her thoughts. She sat up, hair all over her face, dark against her pale skin. "We can't let her do this," she repeated, stronger again. "It's like a phonograph in here," the same voice yelled again, and they all chuckled. "She's been taking away people's freedom for too long now. We have to set Hunter free and find her ledger. Many lives depend on this, and not just in this city. We can't let her get away with this." She looked around the room. At each man with a conviction in her heart she could actually do something. "Who's with me?" she added. One by one, each Coley nodded his head, smiles breaking out all around. "All right, then. Where do we begin?" she asked with a smile. They took a week to plan their jail bust, having found out Hunter was being held in the tower. They bought equipment, built gadgets, and collected supplies in aid of getting in and out and off the Cloud City. It turned out that Book wasn't just a boiler Coley. He was a mechanical engineer who had helped Snow's father maintain the engines. He designed personal gliders that would allow Hunter and Snow to escape the floating city's parameters. Every one of the black-faced crew had a part to play. Snow built herself a harness she could wear on the glider without falling out. She built herself a new dog collar cuff with a few modifications. In the final hours before they set their operation in action, Snow sat at the kitchen table with Pat and a coal pen. He was drawing a temporary tattoo over her shoulder and down her left arm. Snow sat in somber silence, knowing full well the significance of the moment. She was being initiated into the crew as one of them. The artwork was one she had designed and depicted birds flying through the clouds over Skyland. Pat finished off the tattoo as the rest of the crew filled into the room for the last time. They had their gear packed and ready to go. She stood before them, pulling the modified cuff up her right arm and tucked her hair under an engineer hat. Goggles sat atop the hat, keeping her hair in place. "Ready?" asked Pat, checking one over. "Book, you got the birds ready?" he asked, meaning the gliders. Book nodded, yes. "All right, you know the drill. Word has it that the ledger is off-city, but we need to check Raina's drawing room to be certain. Tom and Hick, you set up the diversion and head over to the gliders and set them up with Book. Lo, you and Nick go to with Snip and the rest. You follow me. All clear?" "Yes, sir," they all replied, like some kind of regiment. "Good." He turned to Snow. "You want to say anything, lovely?" he asked her. She shook her head, then nodded furiously. "Make up your mind, lassie," came a cheeky reply from the end of the room, which caused a few chuckles. Snow smiled. "You all saved me, protected me, and kept me safe. If it wasn't for all of you here, I would probably be dead." She looked at each of them in the eye. "I love you all. You mean so much to me." "Okay, I'll stop now," she smiled, and the Joker at the back yelled, "Finally!" Chapter 13. They took 3 different routes from their underground home to the city surface. It was a strange sight seeing very short men, covered in black, running on short legs. Stranger still seeing a beautiful young girl, dressed as a very short man, running along with them. Each team went to their respective positions and kept to the plan. Snow stopped with Pat and his group on the edge of the square that sat at the center of the city. As they stood in the shadows with the tower ahead of them, they waited. It didn't take long for Tom and Hick to set up the diversion. A fire rocket shot high into the night sky, screaming above the city before blasting into thousands of sparkling lights, letting go of its blaring thunder a second later, only to have another rocket scream into the night in its wake. If they weren't there to serve a purpose, Snow would have stopped to watch the wondrous sight. Other fireworks let loose their display of light and sound, drawing out more and more onlookers from surrounding buildings. Finally, Raina's guards left the building in search of the offending troublemakers, who were long gone, giving Lo, Nick, and Snow the opportunity to enter the tower unnoticed, while Pat and his group moved around the back. They moved through the lower corridors of the glass building with ease. It wasn't until they entered the service stairs that they came across maids and servants watching. Out the window, the fireworks on display. They moved upstairs towards Raina's drawing room and found one guard in position outside it. Pat and his team were up next. They set off more fireworks at the back entrance to the tower, and right on cue, the guard moved away from Raina's study to investigate the new distraction. Nick and Lo went into the room first, followed by Snow, only to find it mostly bare. They quickly searched the drawers looking for anything they could use against Raina. Coming up empty, they set off for Raina's bedroom suite next door, finding that empty of any book of any kind as well. After a quick discussion, they decided to check the lower halls at the base of the tower as a last-ditch effort to find Hunter. They only made it to the second floor before Raina herself stepped down the right-hand staircase onto the landing, Hunter following close behind her. Raina was smiling, looking smug, ready to pounce on her young prey. She stood completely still, waiting. Snow made ready to grab Hunter, only to realize he wasn't tied up, nor did he look hurt at all. But the look on Hunter's face stunned Snow the most. He was angry, she realized. He was angry at her. "Quick, miss, back this way." Lo grabbed her arm and they ran back through the glass columns and across the atrium walkway. More guards stepped in their way, cutting off their escape. Changing direction again, they found themselves in the middle of the glass walkway, overlooking the atrium garden below and the front entrance beyond that. So close, but not close enough. Snow struggled against the despair that gripped her heart. Nick and Lo grabbed for her arm, but she shook them off. "No, you guys stick to the plan," she said, and lifted Lo over the railing, dropping him into the pond below. A guard took hold of Nick. Snow bopped him on the nose, then helped to free Nick over the balustrade as well. A guard smacked her in the side of the head as Nick's splash landed in the pond. Lo and Nick escaped the building while she was sprawled out on her tummy on the floor, with 3 guards holding her down. Snow White, Snow White, what am I going to do with you?" Raina had her runaway stepdaughter at last. Chapter 14. Snow sat for what felt like days in a giant gilded cage overlooking Skyland's town square. Like one of the mechanical birds in the Tower Arts Gallery, Raina had her dressed in the bridesmaid dress she wore to the wedding and left her with only a basket of red, juicy apples. At least she got to keep her fading tattoo. The horrible witch was making her point loud and clear. Mess with the Baroness, and you end up in a mess. Actually, those were the terrible, cheesy words Raina had said to Snow before she had the cage lifted over the township. All of a sudden, it became awfully obvious what kind of city Raina had fashioned Skylands into. She had set up her kingdom and crowned herself queen. Any of the lords or ladies who spoke out against her were slapped with fines and duties, and some were evicted from the city altogether. It was truly awful because all of this took place while Snow was in hiding. When Raina placed Snow in a cage on display for all to see, everyone was already so scared of the Baroness, they didn't do a thing to help. Snow waited a day and a half before her thirst was so terrible she had to eat an apple, poisoned or not. She managed 3 apples before nightfall on the second day. The evenings were worse. Shivering from cold, she had nothing to keep herself warm. Before sunrise on the 3rd morning, a basket of bread and water was lifted to the cage by a kind stranger who ran from the scene before she could thank him. She quickly ate and drank and hid the basket under her skirts. It was enough to lift her spirits as she began singing to herself. Her voice carried on the morning breeze. Lying on her back, she watched the birds above in the sky and remembered the tattoo that Pat had drawn on her shoulder. It was mostly gone now, a smudge down her arm. She decided that if she ever lived through this, she would get it inked onto her skin permanently. She laughed, realizing that all her fears meant nothing to her now. No one could tell her what to say, what to wear, how to behave. There were no mountains of expectations on her now. She was free. Sitting in her gilded cage, she was more free than she had been in her whole life, and she couldn't stop laughing. Before dusk, Snow had started to dream about eating apples again, only to be startled by a commotion taking place at the edge of the square. The guardsmen wearing the king's colors were moving towards the tower, looking far meaner than she'd ever seen a guardsman look. She stood up in her cage as it swung backwards and forwards. As she realized it was being lowered to the ground, it hit the metal cobblestones of the square with a clang, nearly toppling her over in the process. Hunter faced her as the cage door opened and she stepped out of it. Angry. So very angry. Swinging both fists, she hit his jaw with the first shot, but missed the second, as she howled at the pain in her hand. "Snow, stop it! I'm trying to set you free," he yelled at her, taking a hold of her shoulder. "That's not what it looks like to me." She swung another fist, which he brushed aside with his own hand. "I know you were angry, but it had to happen this way, or Raina would have suspected me. And you should have known that White Maid was a ruse. To draw you out into the open, it was a trap, you foolish girl. If you had waited 3 days..." "Foolish girl!" she screamed in his face. "How was I supposed to know you were working for the devil?" She spat and spun around, running towards the tower. "It's not like that. I work for the king," he yelled after her. The crowd moved from the square to the front of the tower. Just as the soldiers entered the building, she pushed from the edge of the crowd to the doors, demanding to be let in so she could see her father. They let her through, and Hunter followed in her wake, much to her disgust. Hearing shouting and Edison barking, she ran to the 4th floor landing to find guards taking Raina into custody. Raina was screaming that she wasn't going to let anyone take her dominion from her. Edison was barking, being held back by 2 guards. And there, in the middle of it all, was her father, Lord Petto, with the scariest expression she had ever seen on his face before. It stopped Snow in her tracks. Hunter bumped into her, saw what she saw, and also froze on the spot. Raina was screaming into the Lord's face, spit flying from her mouth, eyes wide and crazy-looking. The guards that held her had nail scratches down their face and arms. "Enough!" Lord Petto roared. "It is over, Raina. I have your ledger." That shut her up, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She stood up straighter, ran her hands through her hair and down her dress, composing herself. She looked up at the Lord and said nothing. The worst kind of pain and betrayal crossed the gentleman's face as he saw the wife he thought he loved stand before him, her silence speaking volumes. It was at that moment the guards relaxed their hold on her, and she swung around towards Snow, moving faster than was possible. Twisting Snow's arm behind the girl's back, Raina screamed at everyone, facing off crowds, men and guardsmen on 2 fronts. But the self-professed queen didn't take into account the swift, barking mountain before it was too late. Edison crashed into both women, sending them over the top of the landing balustrade before sliding to a stop, and everyone yelling and screaming all at once. I'll leave you in suspense for just a second, my darlings. Chapter 15. Lord Petto and Hunter reached the railings at the same time. They saw Snow hanging by the cuff of her right arm, swinging on a thin wire. Stunned, it took them a moment before they raced into action, running down the stairs to rescue Snow below. They yelled out directions for her to hold on and yelled at the man to get below her. Snow had modified the collar to hold her weight, but she didn't count on it bearing the weight of 2 people. Raina, still screaming, held onto Snow's foot, slipping. Snow yelled for her father to hurry, only to find Hunter standing in front of her, reaching for her. "Snow, reach for my hand. Let me help you," he yelled, only inches from taking hold of her. She shook her head at him in panic. "You poisoned me and left me for dead, then hung me up in a cage for days," she screamed, still angry at his betrayal. "I've been working for the king, a mission of great import. I was tasked with finding Raina's ledger. If it wasn't for you overhearing Liam and Raina, I never would have found it." "It's true," came her father's voice. She saw her father's face appear beside Hunter's. As the tension released briefly in the wire of her cuff, it caused the 2 hanging women to slip down a bit. Snow screamed and her father lunged over, taking a hold of her arm, pulling her close to the balustrade where he stood. Then Raina's hold released along with Snow's boot, and she fell 2 stories, screaming until she landed in the pond of the atrium below. The change in tension on the wire again caused Snow to bounce. Snow cried out again and closed her eyes until arms encircled her, guiding her over the railings and into the arms of her father. She hugged him, sobbing in relief in his arms for what felt like hours. It was finally over. Raina broke a leg and killed a golden koi fish on landing in the pond. She was taken into custody by the king's royal guard, and her slave trade empire was disbanded. And many women and children were set free and returned to their families all over the kingdom. Stripped of her title, land, and wealth, Raina spent the remainder of her life working in the royal kennels, cleaning up after the king's many dogs. All 7 of Snow's heroic little friends were introduced to society as new lords of the realm. Her father thanked each and every one of them and gave them medals of honor and new jobs as mechanical engineers cloudside. They were quite chuffed with themselves and took up residence on Skyland as Snow's right-hand engineers. I love the word chuffed. Hunter was given the Medal of Noble Valor for his years of service to the king in exposing his great-aunt's slave trafficking ring. He had a lot of explaining to do, though. He apologized to Snow for nearly killing her with the apple, explaining that his duty to king and country had fought a losing battle with his duty he had to his best friend. He explained how it was Snow who had told him about the ledger the Baroness had, and he was able to smuggle it out of the city to the king before the Baroness asked him to find Snow. He was sorry for hurting her and apologized to her about the poisoned apple. She vowed to him she would never eat apples ever again. Snow matured a lot during her incredible adventure on Skyland. It had taken the betrayal of her stepmother and the kindness of her amazing new friends for her to realize what kind of person she wanted to be when she grew up. With Hunter's help, she stayed on Skylands as chief engineer of the city. She was never seen without Edison, her faithful dog, and was often found laughing or arguing with Hunter over anything and everything. Some thought they should get married when they grew up, so that they could continue laughing or arguing for the rest of their lives. As for Lord Peto, when he came back from the king's castle, he made an announcement he would no longer be keeper of Skylands, that the king had agreed to his replacement, considering the circumstance. Lord Peto had truly loved Baroness Raina Montague, and he'd never gotten over the heartbreak. He left the city and never set foot on his greatest engineering accomplishment ever again. He moved back into his old castle and spent the remainder of his years happy, designing many more floating cities and estates, building robots and giant air balloons, and generally keeping the old village on their toes as they ushered in a new cultural steam revolution. And he lived happily ever after. The end. So quoth this raven. If you like this, please hit the little button to let me know. If you didn't, hit the little button to let me know. Leave a comment. I'm always glad to talk with you, my darlings. I'm open to suggestions and criticisms, critiques. If you have not subscribed, please do so and ring the little bell so you know when to come up and see me. And I will talk to you next time, my darlings. Farewell.